Hi, and thanks for joining me. This is the show where regular people like yourself get to share real experiences and insights about pain and life. In these casual conversations, we're usually talking about a type of pain that strikes from out of the clear blue, while we're just living life, often doing everyday things that we've done with no problem before. But for some reason, one day, the body suddenly decides it's just had enough. I'm your host, Yaling Liu. I'm a chiropractor, and some of these guests are my patients. I've been working with bodies in pain since 1994, and one of my favorite parts of practice is still the time I get to spend connecting with people about life as it relates to their pain. Some of the most significant breakthroughs that I see in practice happen through conversation. It's during these frank discussions that we often stumble upon realizations that can help us move forward. And this is exactly why I want to share them with you here.
You're just doing what you should, doing what you should. You're just doing what you should.
Today's episode brings up something I always have mixed feelings about in practice. I really enjoy my time with patients and getting a chance to follow their progress. I get to know more about their daily lives and how who they are impacts their pain experience. But I also think it's important that patients learn to not need me, or at least need the treatments less and less as time goes by. That is the best measure for progress, in my opinion. So when I don't hear from someone for a long time, I know it's because they feel better or they're managing on their own with the things they learned from being in pain. And this is exactly the case with my guest today.
I'm actually not in pain right now, which I should be. I could be, given how much exercise and work I've done.
We're talking to Greg, and I'm asking him to share a little bit about his pain or lack thereof. Greg first came to see me for care 18 years ago, but over the past 2 years, I've only seen him maybe 5 times, and none of those times were in extreme crisis at all. He, like many others, has challenged me professionally and taught me a lot, simply by allowing me to witness his journey through pain and life during all of those years, sometimes forcing me to think outside of my box. It's a real treat for me to have had a chance to interview him shortly before he moved away from the area. When we sat down to chat, he was a few days away from driving cross-country to relocate closer to his family on the East Coast where he grew up. This means that the day before, he had just finished physically moving all of his belongings in preparation for this trip.
I'm actually not in pain right now, which I should be. I could be, given how much exercise and work I've done.
So it seems like Greg would be a good person to speak with for insights about getting and staying out of pain. But you can be the judge of that as you listen to today's episode.
I think one of the things that has really helped me over the years has been just starting to get in tune with my body and notice things before they actually become a problem.
Do you feel like you know how to tune into your body? Or does your approach to life make you tune it out and just keep going? A lot of athletes and performers get good at tuning out pain in particular. The show must go on. But if you're not a professional athlete or a performer and you're ignoring your pain, why are you doing that? I think we all feel pressure to keep the show going, so to speak, whether it's because of work obligations or home obligations. We all have others counting on us to some degree. But pain is information, and the longer we put off tuning into it, the harder it becomes to listen. What does tuning into your body even really mean?
For me, it's just paying attention to those little messages that your body tells you, where muscles are getting fatigued, where, joints are feeling sore. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like when you're hiking and you notice that you got a little bit of an area in one of your shoes where it's bugging you a little bit. And if you take the time, and it might only be 20 minutes into the hike, so you can't have a blister already.
Yeah.
But if you take the time and adjust your sock and, take your boot off and look at your foot and see what's going on with it. Adjust your sock or put a little piece of mohair on there. You're not going to have any problem. It's exactly what you need to do. But most of us don't do that. And we just you try to, as you're walking, kind of stamp it into the ground differently and get it to move around, and then, half an hour later, it's still bugging you a little bit, another 45 minutes and it's still bugging you. And then you finally take your shoe off and now you got a blister.
I love this analogy that Greg presents. Why don't we just stop and take care of the sock in the shoe right away? What happens when you ignore something that won't go away? Your brain very adaptively turns it into a background noise, right? Like white noise, the white noise of sensation. The longer you ignore something, the more it becomes just like that white noise, and the better you get at not noticing it. But that doesn't mean that part of you isn't suffering. You might get to a point in your hike where you just don't feel that irritation in your shoe anymore, even though you didn't stop to fix it. But when you take your shoe off at the end of the day and see the bloody blister, it's obvious there was some damage. And when distraction from endorphins from hiking subside, the pain from that damage starts to ramp up. This is the pain and damage that you might have averted if you stopped and made adjustments early in your hike. Okay, so the flip side, not noticing body sensations can actually be crucial to functioning in the world. Have you ever heard of the term interoception? It's in the same family as the word proprioception, which is maybe a bit more common. You may have heard proprioception is about sensation of where your body is in space. Interoception, then, is also a word used to describe sensation, in this case, sensation of our own physiology. This includes the activity of all of our organ systems. Can you imagine being aware of every single thing going on inside of your body physiologically at this very moment? It would be way too much. Some disorders of sensory processing on the autism spectrum involve glitches in our interoception. So tuning things out, letting them be white noise, definitely has its place. But should you let your pain become white noise too? The best way to find out what to pay attention to and what to tune out is to first tune in and develop a context for your sensations, good and bad. This is how our nervous system learns about everything. It's what we do from the earliest age, and we keep doing that as we go through life. Tuning into your body can happen in a lot of different proactive ways long before pain forces you to. We'll touch on the example of Tai Chi in that context a little later on.
People think Tai Chi's for old people, but half the people in my class are young.
And they're having to tune in, so it's a lot for the nervous system.
It's a lot. A lot of people finish class and they go home and take a nap.
Yeah.
And it's not because their body's physically tired. It's because their brain is their brain's tired because they've just changed a bunch of pathways.
So that's Michele. Michele has been teaching Pilates, Tai Chi, Kung Fu, and dance for over 25 years. She co-founded a movement and healing studio here in Seattle called Shift. And we'll hear a bit more from her later on. Greg had lower back pain long before starting to see me for help. He studied and practiced judo for many years, as well as some aikido for a few years. He found himself at a crossroads where so many of us end up when we try to power through pain. He was at the point where it wasn't only interfering with judo, but also just his everyday life. Accordingly, he found himself in doctor's offices looking for a solution. The messages he got was that he had a degenerative defect in his spine that required surgery. He was not a fan of the idea of surgery, but agreed to cortisone injections, which seemed minimally helpful initially, and he found himself needing another.
And then they, and that was, the second one didn't really have the effect they wanted it to, and so then they were talking about fusing discs and stuff like that, and I was like, no, that's not what I want to do.
When was this? Before I met you? Or
yeah, it was probably right before. Oh. Yeah, it's probably, I think part of why I met you was related to trying to find alternative things to surgery. And so I also started seeing an acupuncturist at the time, and I also did different massage therapies, and I found that all of those things helped differently to alleviate the pain. What was more important was I started to become more in tune with my body.
Another way to tune into the body is by receiving body work. In fact, I think this is the reason we start to see improvement with many conditions treated with bodywork. It's not actually any specific magical technique or practitioner. It's simply the experience of learning to listen to sensation during and after treatment, getting help contextualizing or figuring out what's good, safe, and productive discomfort. And ideally, when treatment is done well, it can provide windows of relief from pain, which helps the nervous system reset and remember what it's like to be out of pain.
When I was doing judo, I was doing it twice a week, and then occasionally also doing the tournament on the weekend.
Oh, wow.
And it was like having multiple car accidents a week.
I did some poking around, and it turns out that Greg's comparison between judo and car accidents is supported by science. There's a 2005 study by a group of researchers in the UK who used video recordings and analyses to conclude that martial arts maneuvers, like some of those used in judo, quantifiably compare to the same sort of injuries sustained in a rear impact car collision. What happens in a car crash is what we call whiplash. We often associate whiplash with the neck, but it's technically something that can happen in all parts of the spine anytime the body comes to a sudden stop after being forcibly thrown through space. Think of doing this to your body 3 times a week. If you're going to do this over and over week after week, chances are your nervous system is learning to adapt and tune out the pain. What amount of pain does it take to make change happen? What do you think made you, what was the thing that made you more aware of how to...
Well, I don't like pain, and yeah.
That's good.
And I don't get a lot of pleasure out of it, and so, I mean, I've always used it as a tool to, okay, I need to do something different there. So I don't like pain. I want to be able to be active. I want to be able to continue doing things, and so I want to find ways that allow me to continue being active and not.
That's good motivation.
Yeah. So that's where it all comes from.
I say, so what if he doesn't like pain and wants to stay active? I think a lot of people who share that sentiment don't all seem to find their way through it just because they want it. Pain is definitely a good motivator, but what I noticed with Greg was that he also seemed to believe it was possible to continue being active, despite what he heard from doctors early in his journey. He didn't believe them when they said he'd probably not be walking in later life if he didn't have surgery. It's the optimism and conviction in his own ability to change things that I think makes the difference. But then, how did he get there? Maybe it's the same thing that got Greg through nursing school and on to a healthcare career. A belief in his abilities, a belief in change. Certainly knowing more about anatomy and physiology helps, but Greg's journey through judo and with soccer started long before he became a nurse. Who knows, it could just as easily be resilience he developed while facing adversity as a kid in the schoolyard. If you're someone who has successfully made the leap from pain to being fully engaged in life the way you want to be, what's your story? How did you do it? Why do you think it worked? Or if you're still trying to figure it out, what do you think your obstacles are?
So, I mean, another thing that I've learned over the years is about Eastern medicine, which, a lot of these things come out of, and the idea of your chi and getting your energy flowing in the right way, and when you talk to somebody that hasn't figured that out yet, it sounds very foo-foo, but there's got to be something to it. I mean, those cultures have been around for 5,000 years.
Yeah.
So, in fact, it's exactly what judo and aikido are all about, is redirecting your opponent's energies and using them against them. Judo translates to the gentle way.
Oh, nice.
Right?
Doesn't sound like it was gentle.
It's not gentle because you have to practice it.
Oh.
And you necessarily need to be able to physically manipulate someone else's body in order to learn those skills. And in that case, somebody is hitting the ground.
Yeah.
And
right.
So, when you're both practicing, you take turns hitting the ground, and that's really where the damage comes in. The judo itself is just phenomenal. But yeah, it's basically using your opponent's energy against them, because you can only put your energy in one direction at a time. Right. So yeah, I had that initial. So I was open to it, right? I just had thought about it in terms of healing, and now I'm thinking about it in terms of healing.
What does that make you think of when someone talks about energy or chi? Do you picture auras? Adrenaline, maybe, or electromagnetic fields? When Greg talks about redirecting the opponent's energy in judo, he's referring to kinetic energy of their muscular effort and the speed of movement as they come at you. Simply trying to stop a physical force that's being directed at you requires much more effort. It would be exhausting and probably fruitless, so redirecting seems like a wise martial arts kind of choice. What if we look at pain as the opponent? Maybe Greg's search for a solution to his pain was unconsciously steeped in the principles of judo. Was he applying the gentle way on his pain? Redirecting instead of trying to overpower? Trying first to understand it, then using that information to turn the pain back on itself, in a way yielding to the pain, but only in order to learn what it had to tell him about his body's needs, while at the same time not giving up on sources of joy like being active and social.
Like I had this one patient, I was just thinking about this the other day, I had this one patient and she was an Alzheimer's patient, bedbound, mostly because of deconditioning at that point, because she was also, as they get, one of the things as that disease progresses is that you become disoriented, you fall a lot, and you become scared of falling, and so you stop trying to do that. It's kind of the opposite of a toddler, right? Toddlers fall down all the time. They bump themselves really hard in the butt, whatever, but then they're up trying it again. And this is kind of the opposite of that. This is them basically learning a lesson, in a not perfectly clearly thinking way. It's like, okay, that hurt, and then they become fearful of it, and so they stop doing it. And as soon as you stop moving, you lose it.
Greg brings up a great point here in regards to pain and injury. The toddler falls and then gets up with new information that his little brain and nervous system immediately apply towards learning what works and what doesn't, all for the purpose of becoming accomplished at walking. We grown-ups, on the other hand, all too easily succumb to the exact opposite effect. Too often, our pain experiences lead to perceived limitations. We become depressed about our inevitable deterioration, and the worry about re-injury paralyzes us into inaction, or even just tentative action, and all that does is decondition the body, and more importantly, the brain. We start teaching ourselves how to be injured instead of how to return to the activities and life that we love. So while pain is a motivator, it can also be deeply linked with fear, and any fear, but the fear of pain in particular, can be immobilizing both figuratively and literally.
Part of it is paying attention to what I'm feeling and not trying to do more than I'm capable of, but not being afraid of things.
Yeah.
Not letting it sideline me.
Even though some of us fearful practitioners have said, I can't believe you're playing soccer. Yeah, exactly. When Greg first came to see me, he was heavily involved with an intramural soccer league here in town. And being the powerful player that he is, he had a soccer kick that I was certain was hurting his lower back, not to mention the bursts of sprinting around the field in the heat of a play, or the full contact with other teammates that might happen with aggressive plays. 18 years ago, which was when Greg first came to see me, I was still conveying to my patients more caution than I now know was needed. That sort of advice to avoid activities sometimes risks causing the very counterproductive fear of movement. It's important to know when to take a break from an activity, to allow recovery from injury, and sometimes that activity will need to be modified in order to be less disruptive in the future, but advice to avoid it altogether is never a realistic option, even if it is the activity associated with injury. Just as with the fear that comes from falling as we age, fear of re-injury can snowball, causing aversion to even safe activity. As a chiropractor, my mind is often on the biomechanics of life and the mechanical impact of everything that we do. But there is a lot more going on that has nothing to do with movement or posture necessarily at all. Luckily, Greg didn't listen to anyone who told him no, especially when it came to soccer. And over the years, I also came to understand what an important part of Greg's social well-being this was. Saying no to soccer would have meant much more than a few nights of extra time at home resting. Not only were there several games a week, but there was also a large community of friends, meals and drinks and get-togethers off the field in conjunction with games. Between that and the physically joyful outlet of sprinting for the ball, soccer is part of Greg's lifeblood, and that's what drove him to find a way to keep playing. He was back on the field as soon as possible, not only in spite of his lower back problems, but also in spite of a knee injury that required surgery years later. He worked hard to rehab that knee and, again, returned to soccer just as soon as he could. So maybe there's more to the idea that pain is a motivator. It's more than just wanting to be active. For Greg, I think it might have been, at least in part, a primal drive that we all share to be part of a community of people just like us. Belonging. But not everybody has a community of healthy, active, and joyful people, which leaves me wondering, how do those people find motivation to take action, to get and stay out of pain? Maybe that's the missing piece for some of us who stay in pain. Not having healthy community to provide positive behavior modeling or the support to persevere and keep hope about being pain-free and active again one day. What do you think of that? Do you have a healthy community?
No, I think it's just that I get a joy out of playing, which is why I want to go do it. And then I also have now somehow over the years developed an internal thermometer or barometer about what I'm doing, and am I doing it right? Am I doing it in a way that's not going to cause injury?
Be careful of the idea that there is a right or a wrong way of doing things. Greg's idea of right or wrong for himself wouldn't necessarily apply to you, and vice versa. He's developed his own internal barometer based on years of experiences in his own body. The other pitfall of this notion of right or wrong is that we can't always account for every variable in each situation. So you can be trying your hardest to do things the way you know to be right for you, and yet still end up in pain. If you don't realize that there are often outside factors that you just can't control, you might come away thinking that you failed, leaving you defeated and discouraged. And no good can come of that.
If you're open to learning from your experiences and not just going back in and doing the same thing again, then I think you can make those changes. And I've had significant pain is a huge teacher. The first time my back went out and I bent over to spit the toothpaste out and I stood up and it just went whong, right?
It's a great sound effect.
Yeah, thanks. The second time I went out, I was sneezing. And my back was in a position, I can't remember, I think I was sitting down. It's mundane stuff. It's just everything is all lined up to be unhappy, and then you add this extra whatever it is. And so now I bend my knees instead of bending over at the waist when I brush my teeth.
I'd completely forgotten until I sat down to record Greg's story again that his is one of many, but one that stands out because it inspired part of a patient story that I share in my book. If you've read it, you'll recognize his example of how he experienced an episode of severe back pain following the very mundane, everyday activity of reaching for toothpaste. That is exactly part of the experience of book character named Ed. Of course, each book character is a mix of numerous patient stories and not just one.
So yeah, but it's what I was saying at the beginning. It's about body mechanics and being aware of where your body is and being aware of what those muscles are doing and what you've asked those muscles to do. But that's exactly, going back to judo, that's exactly what judo is. It's like all of our muscles are designed to only work in one direction at a time. And so if you're pushing against something, everything in your arm, all the muscles that are acting as that push are only able to contract or release. And it's another group of muscles that need to contract in order to pull back.
Right.
And they're the opposite muscles, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can only do one of those things at a time. You can't do both of those things. And it does take at least a split second to decide to change. And so when somebody is pushing on you in judo, they're only pushing. And if you at the right instant yank them, then they have no way to counterbalance that because they're already off balance in the wrong direction, and then they can't pull back. And that's exactly what judo is.
What Greg is saying here made me think about pain as a skilled judo practitioner. The pain is dealing with us as the opponent. Picture this. In judo, if the goal is to put your opponent off balance, that's exactly what pain does to us, isn't it? Our pain yanks us often into what can be a very distracting experience. Once we have pain, it forces us to notice that we're off balance. If we take time to figure out why we were caught off balance in the first place, we can then, in turn, become the judo master of sorts and turn the tables. I'm saying maybe the key is to learn what our vulnerabilities are that allow us to be yanked into pain. My argument has always been to look at biomechanics, biochemistry, and emotions for the full-rounded answer. Greg has just given me a fun new way of thinking about it.
Well, I mean, you're too enlightened to make this an interesting interview.
That is not true. Learning new stuff every day. In fact, I recently went to a beginning Tai Chi class.
I was just thinking about how Tai Chi is sort of like the slow motion version, right, of all that. Good for you.
It was fantastic. Actually, Heather's partner teaches it on Thursday.
Yeah. Oh, good. You went there.
Yes.
I was so happy to hear that Greg explored Tai Chi, but in particular with Michele, who we heard from earlier. Michele and Heather are co-founders of Shift, a Seattle movement and healing studio. It's where Michele teaches Pilates, Tai Chi, and Kung Fu, and provides space for dance and other related workshops. Heather is a sports-certified acupuncturist and also teaches Kung Fu and Tai Chi. I have often shared patients with both of these women over the past couple of decades and have always found a much more complete integration of care when therapeutic movement and acupuncture are both combined with my treatments.
It was really, really interesting. It felt really good to be there. It was a workout, which surprised me because you're not doing anything very fast or hard and lifting any weights or anything, but you're doing everything really slowly and consciously, and so it's like slow motion, low impact calisthenics.
Breaking a sweat, right?
Yeah, definitely getting warm. It was really neat to kind of learn, and it was the basics, which is great because I've never really studied. I've learned a little bit of it. I've seen it through my work in judo and some Aikido that I did, but I never really learned it. It's also about your energy, right?
Right.
And thinking about how it's flowing through your body. And, it's foo-foo until you realize it's not.
Yeah, when you experience it.
Yeah, when you experience it.
Interesting.
So I had a chance to sit down with Michele to get a little insight into the movement-energy connection as it relates to Tai Chi in the way that she teaches it.
And so he talked about coming to your class and really like that having a big impact on him because of how it resonated with him in his experience of energy. So I guess because you're the expert and you've been teaching it for a while, I wanted to hear what you had to say about just how Tai Chi fits into working with people with pain.
I think Tai Chi works sort of on two main levels, one being the energetic level, but I think because I'm also a dancer and Pilates teacher, I work a lot on the anatomical level too. So I would say on the energetic plane, it's interesting, we talk a lot about relaxation in order to allow easy flow of movement throughout the whole body. So any place that there's a restriction, you have the opportunity to feel it. We always do a standing meditation. We probably stand for maybe 10 minutes max. I'd say anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes, we'll be standing still. And they're checking into various parts of the body. I usually start at the feet and go up. So I have them check into their feet, feel what their heels feel like, and all that. But mostly they're looking for a sense of relaxation in the body that's not collapse. So one of the things that I talk about is feeling like the energy in the bones rises up and helps the body feel strong really on a deep level. But then the energy of the muscles and the other tissue sort of relaxes down and rests on the bones. So that when they're standing, their muscles aren't necessarily trying to hold their body together, but they're waiting for a cue of what to do. But they're not preset. Because people like to preset things, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then when they move, rather than thinking of the muscle, pick up the thing and move it, we think about the muscles sort of waking up and twining around the bones. And then that spiral being the thing that initiates, lifting your hand or taking a step or shifting your weight. So we talk about that a lot as far as how the energy in the movement happens. When they start, they're in a very held position. By the time they're done, they're shaking. Their legs are shaking, often kind of violently.
That's what really struck him, I think, is how much of a workout that really was for him.
It makes you
He's a big
sweat.
guy with big muscles. And so,
it seems like it should not make you tired, but it's really exhausting.
Yeah, I definitely get that.
A lot of people, I think a lot of people that have a lot of pain in their body physically also have a lot of stress in their life. And when they have a lot of stress in their life, they're busy managing that stress, which is out in front of them or, around them. And they're not always taking the time to check into their body. And so just by the fact of them going, oh, I can feel my chest. Oh, I can feel my back. Not I can feel my third rib, but I can feel the back of my body and I can get it to relax. And when it does that, I can breathe better now. But, people think Tai Chi is for old people, but half the people in my class are young and they die doing Tai Chi. It kills them.
Not literally,
no. It's hard. Yeah. It's really hard. It looks like you're not doing anything, but it's really, really hard. Yeah. And that's probably the biggest comment I get from people the first time they take a Tai Chi class is they're like, that's really hard. Mm-hmm. And if I have people that don't come back every now and then, it's because they're like, I think it's because it was too hard for them, actually. Yeah. Not because it was too easy for them and they were bored. Mm-hmm. I think it was overwhelming how difficult it was. And they can't believe that standing still and moving that slowly could make their body shake that much.
And they're having to tune in. So it's a lot for the nervous system.
It's a lot. A lot of people finish class and they go home and take a nap. Yeah. And it's not because their body's physically tired. It's because their brain's tired because they've just changed a bunch of pathways.
Do you think your brain could use a workout? If you've ever had pain that took you by surprise, chances are you could use some help tuning in. Have you done Tai Chi or some other form of mindful movement? Even just allowing yourself to be still for a minute or two during the day can help you tune in to your body and tune out the stress that's pulling your attention away from yourself, dispersing it out in front of you and all around you instead of centering and grounding inside of you. There's a lot of talk about energy in this episode. With no fixed definition of what it is or how it relates to pain, it's a bit of a shapeshifter. The definition of energy changes depending on context. It's an abstract concept when equated with the concept of qi, for sure. Qi in Chinese medicine being the life force, the vital life force that circulates around the body. But if we look at thermodynamics of energy, the laws of thermodynamics say that energy exists in many forms. Heat, light, chemical, and electrical, for starters. All of these can be found in the workings of the human body. We perceive and transmute light with our eyes and brain. We have body heat that can fluctuate and influence our well-being. Areas of inflammation get hot. Body chemistry is certainly a feature of being human. And bioelectricity of the body is evident to anyone who's ever dragged their feet across a carpet and then experienced a spark from touching a doorknob or having your hair stand on end. So no matter how we think about the concept of energy, E equals mc squared, calories, joules, or kilojoules, or simply qi, all of it relates to the experience of having a human body. It translates into things like effort, intention, flow. It's both quantifiable and elusive. Greg goes on to talk about one of many ways he thinks about energy in regards to pain and healing.
I really do think that your qi and your pain, are related.
How so?
Well, I think that they work on the same. I think that they work in the same pathways. I think that when your qi gets gummed up or stopped up because of an injury in a place, then you can experience discomfort in that area, or maybe downstream from that area. I kind of think of it as like water or electricity, flowing. It's like, when you have a nice clear route for it to go, it all works well and it's smooth.
So Greg is going with the electricity version of energy here. Actually, he mentions water, and it makes me think of hydroelectric power, hydroelectricity. The power of a waterfall can generate electricity. It's kind of an interesting image to keep in mind when thinking about energy in the body.
Electricity is an interesting concept to think about and related to it, because if you take a wire and you coil it up, like a long cable or whatever, and you coil it up and you run electricity through it, that coil gets warm, right? Because it's bound up and it's now feeding on itself and it's generating its own little electromagnetic current in there. Electricity is still going through, but there's also some of it is getting changed into heat. in that knot of a wire.
And it gets changed into heat more so in the coil rather than in a straight wire?
Or it's able to dissipate in the wire when it's straight appropriately, and it can't because it's all generating heat itself. And if you take that and you put that into tissue, then you got inflammation.
Inflammation in its most obvious form is definitely a heat producer. The 3 hallmarks of inflammation are redness, heat, and swelling. And it seems really reasonable to say that an area of inflammation is a concentrated area of heat, and therefore energy that is not able to dissipate. Often applying ice is used to cool things down and move the heat, energy, inflammation, whatever you want to call it, out of the area to dissipate it. Another thing that helps move inflammation is body motion. Lying still doesn't allow for things to circulate as well, so movement pushes fluids around in the system. There are many differing views on the subtleties of body energy, healing energy, but thanks to emerging research that acknowledges the importance of biopsychosocial relationships in pain, we now know that our beliefs exert a significant biological influence on the outcome of our pain experience and resolution or lack thereof. As I'll say again and again, being in pain is not your fault, but we all have more control over our experience of pain than we realize. This means that if you believe with your whole heart that little green men are inhabiting your brain, then that is your truth, and it's not my place or anyone else's place to say that that's not true. It's true for you. It's my responsibility, though, to share alternative perspectives based on what I know and open the door to other plausible causes for your pain that might have easier solutions, but not to belittle your reality. I'm not saying that the idea of energy is comparable to the idea of little green men, but I do know that in some conventional medicine circles, it's considered almost equally laughable sounding. I'm firmly of the mind that what's most important is not the specifics of our individual beliefs about health and pain, neither is it the specific words we use to describe our personal understanding of health and pain. It's much more important to me to honor my patient's paradigm, whatever that might be. As long as it's not self-destructive or harmful to others, I see no reason to dispute someone's belief systems. If it's empowering, like the idea of harnessing or moving energy for better health, well then power to you. It's just language. I think we all have a relationship with energy in the body. We just don't all call it by the same name.
Well, I'm not an expert. So much of what I've come to has been trial and error in my own body. But there's also been a lot of influences from outside, and I just try to incorporate that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It goes back probably to one of those first things I said in this interview, that just paying attention to what your body is telling you, because it's sending you signals all the time. And I think most of us, most of the time, are sort of not paying attention to that. And ultimately, what it boiled down to me was that I didn't like the answer that Western medicine had given me to do a surgery on my back. And that was, 20-something years ago. They wanted to fuse my discs, and they were telling me that I, might not be walking by the time I'm 40 based on, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know that I believe that. And so I wanted to go and investigate other things.
Not an expert, he says. Oh, but yes, he is. And not because he's a practicing nurse. The way I see it, he's the expert on his body. He has had well over 40 years of experience with it, and so are all of you when it comes to your own body. Trial and error makes us experts as to what works and what doesn't work for us. Not anyone else, just ourselves. Paying attention pays off, and once you remember that you are your own best expert, you might find it easier to question what people try to tell you about your situation. You don't have to accept no for an answer if that doesn't feel right for you. And this doesn't mean you should or have to go it alone, but you can find people who are willing to honor your journey and help you look for solutions that are right for you and still in your best interest.
So I wanted to go and investigate other things, and as I did, I did get relief, which is important, right? I got relief from chiropractic, I got relief from acupuncture. And I'm like, well, if this can work as well or better than their cortisone injection.
Greg's definitely right about this. Finding relief is a key starting point. Even if it's not lasting relief or a magic fix, it is an important window for your nervous system. Relief from pain may give you a chance to reset and remember being pain-free, which goes a long way in reassuring your body and brain that it is possible to find your way back. While you're getting temporary relief, whether that's with medication or therapeutic treatments of some sort, don't forget to do the hard work of learning why you're having pain. You'll have to listen hard and be open to making changes in how you move forward in life. You might have to be willing to be diligent, but if you manage all that, it will pay off.
So it's not about blocking the pain, right? It's about figuring out why you're having it and correcting it. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's what my final thought would be is like, why are you having pain? And I sometimes think in medicine, we're looking for somebody to do something for us or to us rather than do stuff ourselves. And so just listen to what your body's telling you. It'll tell you when you're doing stuff that's wrong. And if you pay attention to it and stop and pull off your shoe and check your sock.
Right. Put the moleskin on.
Yeah. Then you can have a great hike. And if you don't, then you end up with a blister and you go home early.
Yeah. Are you walking around with something in your shoe that you've been ignoring or tuning out? Remember that you are the best expert on what works and what doesn't work for you. But you can only be that expert if you find a way to listen, tune into, and learn from the sensations that are calling for your attention as you walk through your life.
I'm a walking, yes, I'm a talking. I'm a walking and a talking and a squeaking and a squawking telling.
That wraps up another conversation about everyday pain. Please join me for another episode next week with more explorations of why it hurts, how to make it stop, and keep it from happening again. If you have thoughts about this episode or want to share your own experience with pain, please join our growing community at Everyday Pain Forum on Facebook groups. That's Everyday Pain Forum. If groups are not your thing, you can just like and follow the Everyday Pain Guide Facebook page or check out tweets by @KnowEverydayPain. It's the good folks at weeditpodcasts.com who kindly and patiently help to tidy up my sometimes unruly audio tracks. Our theme music is by Eric and Magill, and you can check out the other artists and businesses featured in this podcast by going to stopeverydaypain.com, where you'll find all the episodes and more. Guests' names are often altered when requested in order to protect privacy. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, I hope you also find a way to connect and talk about your own pain.